I still remember the weight of the air when I stepped into the valley. August 12th, 2023. Feels like a lifetime ago, yet every sound, every flicker of light through the branches is etched into me as if it happened yesterday. I had walked into the silent valley alone, carrying my cameras, my maps, and the quiet conviction that I could capture something the world hadn't seen before. 8 years of wilderness work had shaped me into someone who thought he understood the rhythms of the forest. But here those rhythms were different. They pressed against me in ways I couldn't explain. The ground seemed to remember footsteps long before mine, as though it had stored the echoes of others who had passed through but never returned. The forest was cathedral-like, pillars of Douglas, first so immense that the sky itself seemed carved into fragments. I set up my first base near a creek that wasn't marked on any of my maps. Water so clear it refracted light in strange ways, bending stones into shifting shapes I couldn't quite trust. The valley felt untouched, as if it had resisted not just settlement, but time itself. By the second night, the absence of human presence became a presence of its own. The silence didn't feel empty, it felt full, as if it had a texture, a weight, pressing against my tent fabric. My field journal became the only voice I allowed myself besides the camera's shutter. I wrote, "The silence here is profound, broken only by distant calls. Even the wind doesn't move in the same way." On August 14th, 2 days in, I stumbled across a trail marked by stacked stones, primitive cairns that shouldn't have been here. No ranger maps, no backpacker accounts had ever described them. They were old, but not ancient. Fresh moss hadn't yet claimed their edges. Someone or something still knew these stones. My fingers traced them like braille, trying to read a language older than me. By August 16th, I was deeper than I had ever been in my life. The light through the canopy wasn't just dim. It was colored green, gold, at times almost metallic, as though the sun itself didn't trust the valley and filtered through reluctantly. That night, while photographing a hawk's nest, I felt the forest hold its voice. In an instant, every sound folded into itself. Birds, insects, the moving creek, all of it vanished, as if pressed mute by an unseen hand. 10 minutes of a silence that wasn't silence at all. It was waiting. I stood frozen, listening to the weight of nothing. When sound finally seeped back, it felt rehearsed, as if the forest had agreed it was safe to speak again. On August 18th, the ground near my camp told me something I didn't want to believe. Massive prints, 18 inches at least, pressed into the soft earth. Not bear, not elk, 5 distinct toes. The depth of the impressions suggested something impossibly heavy. I told myself it could be a trick of erosion, that soil and water and imagination had conspired against me. But my hands shook when I tried to cast the first one. The plaster set poorly, bubbles rupturing like nerves under skin. I didn't keep it. That was the first mistake. I tried to explain away what my eyes were, already screaming at me. Then came the nights. August 20th. I woke to a sound that still gnaws at my bones. Not random snaps, not natural cracks. Wood striking wood. A deliberate rhythm. 2 knocks, a pause, 3 more, another pause. Answered from a distance, as if something beyond the trees was listening. The pattern circled me, closing in, until I thought I could feel the vibration of it in my chest. When I stepped out with a flashlight, everything stopped at once. The beam of light cut across trees, brush, nothing. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. The rhythm still hung in the air like smoke. Each morning after that, the prints returned. Fresh, closer. They weren't stalking in the way a predator stalks prey. It felt more like surveillance, as if I was being cataloged, measured, tolerated for now. And the strangest thing was the feeling that I wasn't alone. Even in broad daylight, the forest was no longer neutral ground. It was a theater, and I had been dragged onto the stage without knowing the script. On August 22nd, while I was photographing what I thought was an elk across a meadow, I saw it. Too tall, the stride wrong, not 4 legs but 2. By the time I lifted my lens, it was gone, only a blur left in the frame. But I know what I saw. My mind tried to rationalize it: pareidolia, shadows, fatigue. Yet my instincts rebelled. The proportions were undeniable. The figure wasn't imagined. It had been there, and it had been watching me. By August 24th, I wasn't just photographing wildlife anymore. I was recording something else, something that shouldn't exist. Voices carried on the wind, not quite human, but not animal either. They threaded through the valley like woven smoke, complex, patterned, conversational. I crept toward the sound, my heart battering like it wanted to escape my ribs. Through the lattice of trees, I saw it 9 feet tall at least, draped in dark hair, standing with a patience that felt deliberate. It looked at me, not like prey, not like predator, like rival. I raised my camera. The click was too loud in the stillness. It watched, then turned and walked away, not hurried, not afraid. A stride that was measured, almost ceremonial, as though I had been given permission to see and nothing more. I wrote in my journal that night, it didn't flee. It acknowledged me. This is no animal. This is something else. And yet, as night came, I couldn't shake the sense that by staying, I had broken a rule I didn't yet understand. That was when I realized the valley wasn't mine to explore. It was theirs, and I had been noticed. The ground beneath my tent pulsed once, faint but undeniable, as if the earth itself had skipped a heartbeat. I lay awake, staring into the dark, waiting for the next sound that would tell me I wasn't imagining this. But none came, only silence that stretched too long, carrying weight it wasn't meant to carry. And in that silence I knew I had crossed a threshold I couldn't return from. By August 26th, I stopped using the word it. I wrote in my journal, they're following me now, not one, not a solitary shadow or chance encounter, several, at least 3, maybe 4, each distinct. I could tell by the tracks, different stride lengths, different weights. The heaviest left prints so deep they held puddles even after dry days. Whatever it was, it carried more weight than a bull elk, and yet it moved with a quietness that unsettled me more than any roar could have. Nights no longer belonged to me. Every time the sun drained behind the firs, my camp transformed into a stage. Voices bled in from the perimeter. Low grunts, sharp clicks, elongated tones that carried intelligence. They weren't random calls. They braided together, overlapping like an argument in a language I wasn't meant to understand. Sometimes it sounded heated, other times like mockery. Laughter twisted into something almost human, but not quite. I pressed my recorder on, terrified of what I might hear when I played it back, but more terrified of forgetting the proof if I didn't. That night I felt movement in the soil again. Heavy steps circling me, pausing, resuming. When I peered through the narrow flap of my tent, the moon revealed silhouettes pacing between the trees. Broad shoulders, long arms brushing bark, heads that turned toward me in perfect unison, as though they already knew where I was looking. I couldn't breathe. The beam of my flashlight trembled in my hand, but I didn't switch it on. I was afraid of what they would do if I shattered the fragile theater of shadow. I told myself, stay still. If they wanted me gone, I'd already be gone. But that wasn't comfort. That was warning. By the 28th, the unspoken boundary between us broke. I was kneeling by the creek, filling my bottles, when I looked up and saw him. No more than 30 feet away, on the opposite bank, towering, massive, every detail crisp in daylight. His eyes weren't animal eyes. They were measuring, waiting. For a moment I thought I was staring at a person lost in the wild for too long. Someone who had shed civilization and become something else entirely. My hand moved toward my camera on instinct. His head tilted, slow and deliberate. Then he shook it. A small movement, but unmistakable. A no. Every cell in my body seized. When I lowered my hand, he nodded once, subtle but clear. Then he melted back into the trees with a stride so fluid it seemed choreographed. My journal entry for that day is smudged with water drops. Maybe from the creek. Maybe from my hands. Maybe from tears. I wrote, they are not beasts. They are something that knows itself. Something that knows me. The nights worsened. They didn't stay on the perimeter anymore. Rocks landed near my camp. Not wild throws, but deliberate ones. One clattered inches from my fire, sending sparks into the dark. Another struck the edge of my pack, tearing the strap. Then the displays, chest thuds like drums. Branches snapped with ferocious force. Guttural roars that weren't warnings so much as announcements. We are here. We are many. This is not your ground. I barely slept. When I did, I woke gasping, convinced I had heard voices inside the camp itself. The more I tried to reassure myself with rational thought, the more irrational it became. I had trained my whole life to observe wildlife without interfering. But this wasn't wildlife. It was society, primitive yet organized. Watching, debating, deciding. And I was the variable in their equation. On September 1st, the thought that had stalked me for days finally settled into my chest. I should leave. But every time I tried to pack, my hands hesitated. The camera rolls, the journal entries, they weren't just evidence. They were history, proof of intelligence that rewrote everything we thought we knew about this continent. How could I abandon that? How could I turn away from what I had already seen? I wrote with a shaking hand. Their shelters are woven. Their tools are shaped. They are not passing through this valley. They are rooted in it. But as I wrote, the forest answered me. A crash, close, deliberate. A guttural bellow so deep it made the leaves tremble. The trees weren't just barriers anymore. They were voices carrying warnings from one shadow to another. And I knew the message wasn't for each other. It was for me. By September 3rd, my camp was no longer mine. Supplies vanished in the night. A food sack torn away, water tablets gone, my gear shuffled as if by invisible hands. Nothing taken that would cripple me outright, just enough to unnerve me. They wanted me weakened, unsettled, off balance. My fire pit had been scattered in the morning, stones rolled out in a perfect circle, a message I didn't understand, but felt in my marrow. I wrote, "It isn't theft. It's a game of pressure. They want me out, or they want me to understand something I can't yet name." And then the cave. 2 miles from camp, in the shadow of a ravine, I found an opening. I don't know if they meant me to find it or if I stumbled on what was forbidden. Inside, torchlight revealed walls painted in layers. Humanoid forms beside elk, deer, bear. Creatures with shapes eerily close to what I had seen in the trees. Some old, fading into stone. Others fresh, still raw with color. My stomach turned with the realization. These weren't just marks. They were records. Generations speaking to each other through stone. A continuity older than the country that now claimed this land. I backed out slowly, my chest hollow with awe and terror. If I had doubted before, I didn't anymore. This valley wasn't wilderness. It was civilization, a hidden one, and I was trespassing inside their history. That night, I couldn't shake the image of the cave walls. Every brushstroke felt alive, as if the hands that made them were still here, waiting, watching. And the thought came to me like a whisper that weighed 1,000 pounds. If they've recorded their past, they will record me too. When I closed my eyes, I swore I heard them closer than ever, breathing just beyond the nylon of my tent, waiting for me to understand the price of what I had seen. September 4th, my last full entry. I can still see my handwriting, frantic and uneven, as though the pen itself was trembling. I had written, "The Alpha has shown himself, the largest I've ever seen, at least 9 feet tall, shoulders like carved stone, a necklace of bones and stones around his chest, proof of symbolic thought, proof of culture." Even as I wrote it, I wasn't sure if I was documenting discovery or recording my confession of trespass. That day I could feel him everywhere, not just watching but shadowing me deliberately. His presence pressed down like weather, no matter which way I turned. I couldn't step out from under him. Every photograph I took of the valley felt stolen, as though the forest itself disapproved. And then, in one moment, I looked up from my lens, and he was there, framed by the trees, eyes fixed on me, steady, unblinking. He wasn't afraid of me. He was evaluating, judging whether I belonged here at all. I should have left then, but I didn't. By nightfall, the forest became a council chamber. Voices everywhere, louder than ever before. No longer whispers in the distance, but booming, layered sounds closing in, circling. It wasn't chaos, it was structured, ordered. They were deciding something. The earth shook under their steps as they moved around me. My tent shuddered in the blasts of sound. At times it felt like thunder wrapped in fur. I curled inside my sleeping bag, gripping my camera like it was a weapon, though I knew it wasn't. Then came the moment I can't forget, no matter how many times I try. The flap of my tent pressed inward, something massive leaning against it. A hand-shaped shadow stretched across the nylon, fingers impossibly long. It stayed there, unmoving, as if testing the thin veil that separated us. I couldn't breathe. My heartbeat roared in my ears until I thought it would give me away. And then, slowly, the shadow pulled back. Steps receded into the night, leaving silence behind like a dropped shroud. I didn't sleep after that. On September 5th, I began the attempt to hike out. Supplies were low, body exhausted, nerves beyond frayed. The forest no longer felt like forest. It felt like a mind awake and following me. Every branch crack was deliberate, every crow call too perfectly timed. They were still with me, hurting me, not attacking, but guiding, though I didn't know where or why. At one point, I stumbled across something left directly in my path. A bundle of woven branches tied with strips of hide like a primitive marker. Inside were stones, arranged in a pattern I didn't recognize. A symbol, perhaps. A warning, perhaps. My hand shook as I set it down carefully, unwilling to carry it farther. When I glanced back minutes later, it was gone. By afternoon, the weather turned. Fog rolled in so thick the forest closed around me like walls. I could barely see 10 feet ahead, yet I knew they were there. Shapes in the mist, moving just beyond visibility. Sometimes a silhouette, sometimes just a sound breathing, low and guttural, never close enough to catch, but never far enough to forget. I found myself talking aloud, just to keep sane. "I'm leaving," I whispered into the fog. "I'm going now. I won't return." The forest gave no reply, only the shifting shadows of what followed me. That evening, I found the cave again, or maybe it found me. I hadn't meant to, but my steps carried me back to its opening. Inside, the walls looked different. New markings, shapes I hadn't seen before, figures that looked like me, small, drawn beside the towering ones. My stomach lurched. My name wasn't on the wall, but it might as well have been. I turned and ran, stumbling through roots and stone, until I collapsed near the creek. My journal's last words came that night. If I can capture one final photograph, it will be proof. Even if I never leave this place, the camera will speak. The world will know. When I pressed the shutter for the last time, I wasn't aiming at wildlife or landscape or even the alpha himself. I was aiming at the truth, whatever it was. That photograph is the one investigators said was damaged, nearly unreadable, a blur of dark shape against the moonlight. But I know what it showed, because I was there and I was looking through the lens. And what I saw looking back at me wasn't a creature. It was a people. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt the weight of inevitability, because in that moment I understood something I never wrote down. They didn't want proof leaving this valley, and they were going to make sure it didn't. The morning of September 6th felt wrong before I even opened my eyes. The forest wasn't alive with birds, or the hum of insects, or even the groan of branches. It was a void, a silence that wasn't absence, but intention. My tent was collapsed, half-dragged, as though in the night someone had tried to erase the mark of my presence here. My gear was scattered, stripped of order. My backpack torn, straps frayed, as though a decision had been made about what I could carry forward and what would be left behind. I tried to tell myself I still had control, that I was leaving, that the pickup point wasn't far, but my compass spun wildly, as if the valley itself had swallowed magnetic truth. Every landmark looked wrong. Every turn carried me deeper instead of out. And the feeling, grew stronger with each step that I was no longer navigating the valley. The valley was navigating me. By midday, my body shook with exhaustion. The fog thickened, swallowing the trail until there was nothing left but an endless blur of green and gray. And in that blur, the shapes began to emerge. Tall, slow, deliberate, always just at the edge of sight. I shouted into the mist, begged them to let me go, promised I would never return. My words fell flat, absorbed by the fog as though it were listening, but not convinced. That night I didn't bother pitching my tent. I sat against a cedar trunk, camera in my lap, recorder on. The voices came again, closer than ever. Not angry, not mocking, almost deliberate. A cadence, a rhythm, like decisions being made. My own breathing sounded foreign to me. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound wasn't blocked. It resonated through the ground itself, through the bones of the trees, through me. At some point I must have slept, or lost consciousness. I woke to find stones arranged around me in a perfect circle, not scattered, placed. Inside the circle, none of my gear remained, only my camera and journal lying neatly together on the ground in front of me. The message was clear enough. This is what you will leave with. Nothing else. I picked them up and began walking. I don't know how long. Hours, days, maybe both. The valley had ceased to be forest. It was now a labyrinth. Each turn bled into the next. Each ravine echoed with sounds that were not mine. I stumbled across places that made no sense. Trees stripped of bark in geometric patterns. Piles of bones arranged like offerings. Markings on stone so fresh they looked painted that morning. I wanted to believe they were natural, that my mind was breaking under the weight of solitude. But I knew better. September 7th, my final recording. My voice on that tape is not steady. I hear myself whispering. They're not chasing me. They're leading me somewhere deeper, somewhere I'm not meant to see. If anyone finds this, if anyone finds me, know that they're real. They're not animals. They're not myth. They are here, and they decide who leaves. After that, there are only fragments. A scream carried on the wind that might have been mine. The sound of branches breaking like bones. Heavy steps fading into nothing. Then silence. When they found the camp on September 12th, none of me was there. Only the scattered gear, the torn clothes, the journal, the camera. No body, no trail. Nothing to close the circle. Some say I was taken, carried away into the valley's hidden arteries. Others say I died of exposure, my remains hidden by time or by hands not my own. The most unnerving theory is the one my own words hinted at, that I stayed, that they allowed me to remain folded into their secret history, another shadow among theirs. But I can tell you this, as the memory drifts between nightmare and confession. The silent valley is not silent at all. It breathes, it remembers, it decides. And once you enter, you do not walk alone, because some mysteries don't wait to be solved. They wait to consume.